Hello everyone, my name is Kelly, and in today's session we're going to learn about the differences between similes and metaphors. So, have you heard of a simile or a metaphor? You may have heard of these words, you may have heard of these figurative features, but maybe you confuse them. Maybe you muddle up a simile and a metaphor. So it makes it difficult for you to identify them when you're reading, and it makes it difficult for you to analyze them when you're writing about them, or it might be challenging for you to actually use a simile or a metaphor in your own writing effectively because you confuse the two. Well, don't worry. In today's session, we're going to go through that so you will be clear on what a simile is, what a metaphor is, and the differences between them. So let's dive in. I'm really excited. I really enjoy looking at these figurative features. So it's always important to think about your learning objectives, and these are your learning objectives. Why is it important? Well, I like to use an analogy. I like to think about going on holiday. Let's say I said, we're going on holiday. Pack your things. Well, without knowing the end destination where you're going, you won't know what to pack, will you? You won't know what to bring. For example, if you were going to Spain in summer, it's going to be hot, so you're going to need sunscreen. Might want to wear shorts or a t-shirt. But let's say you were going to Germany in the middle of winter, where the temperatures plummet and it's freezing. You're not going to want sunscreen or t-shirts or shorts. You're going to want coats, woolly hats, right? The same is true for your English learning. You need to know your objective so you know what your end goal is. And this is really important for you as a learner because it will help you to know whether you have achieved that goal by the end of the session. So, from today's session, you will know the definition of a simile and a metaphor, the differences between a simile and a metaphor, and how to identify a simile and a metaphor. So, make sure you write that down. It's always good for you to have a copy of your objectives so that you can reflect on them. So, what is a simile? What is a simile? What do you think a simile is? Okay, maybe write your definition down. And it's okay if you don't know as well. So, a simile compares two things using as or like. For example, the classroom was like a prison, or the classroom was as restrictive as a prison. Can you see the classroom is being compared to a prison? And we use the word like, or we can say as. Now, a quick note, when you're using something like as, it's important that you think about the quality, okay? By that, what I mean is you need to think about, well, what quality does the classroom have that makes you think of a prison? So it could be restrictive. You could say the classroom was as cold as a prison or as lonely as a prison, okay? Because I've never been to prison, but I'm assuming that prisons, from the looks of it, are quite cold and quite lonely because you can't see your family or your friends, right? So when you're using as, you need to think about the quality that you want to compare, the quality that you want your reader to think about, okay? So as an exercise, have a think about then. Let's say the classroom is something positive. Okay, let's imagine that this classroom is vibrant, it's brightly colored, it's a place where kids love to learn. What simile could you come up with then? Okay, and it might be quite a noisy classroom as well. So you might say the classroom was like a circus, or the classroom was as chaotic as a circus. I mean, I don't know how positive that is, but it's definitely better than a prison, right? So yeah, think about that and write your answer down in your notebook so that you can have a play with this idea. And it's really important that you understand then similes are what we call figurative features. It's not literal, okay? It's not saying that the classroom is really a prison. It's just comparing them so that the reader can have this image of what the classroom is like. So when I said the classroom was like a circus, you might have instantly thought of bright colors, bright displays, it being quite noisy, because that's what a circus is like. Okay, so let's move on then. So, what is a metaphor then? We now know what a simile is. So, what is a metaphor? Have a think and write your answer down what you think it is. It's always important to think about it and see what you already know. So, a metaphor also compares two things, but it does this by saying one thing is another thing. So we remove the like, we remove the as, and we replace it with is. So the class, or was if it's the past tense. So the classroom was a prison. The classroom was a restrictive prison. Can you see that? So with a metaphor, it differs from a simile in that we don't say like or as, we say it is something else. But they are both still comparing. Okay, so have another go at this. So if we said the classroom was a circus, you're going to think, oh, it's pandemonium, there's chaoticness, it's going to be loud and vibrant, right? And then you might want to think about, the qualities of it. What could you think about the classroom that makes you think of a prison? So you can say the classroom was um, a loud, bustling circus. So can you see, by having that quality added there, it immediately makes your reader think about how noisy it is, and it makes them think about how the classroom is full of life. Yeah, and again, depending on how it's used in the subsequent sentences will determine whether it's positive or negative, or maybe a mixture of both, right? So, what is the difference then between a simile and a metaphor? We know the difference in terms of the construction, right? One uses as and like, simile, and one says it is something else, which is a metaphor. And we know that they both compare two things. And we know that they're both figurative, right? It's not literal. It's not saying it's literally a prison. Otherwise, it would be a classroom in a prison. So, what is the difference then? What do you think? So think about how each makes you feel. Okay, think about the feeling you have. So just listen. The school was like a prison. The school was a prison. So how do each of those sentences make you feel? Make a note of it in your book. So the difference between a simile and a metaphor is, while both use imagery to enhance descriptions, similes feel more objective because there's a clear comparison. It's obvious that there's a comparison because we've got that word like or as. It kind of softens it a bit. And they invite us to hold these two images in our mind so we can think about the similarities. And metaphors, on the other hand, they go one step further. If you think about it, they're more powerful. They're more powerful than a simile. They create a stronger, more immersive feeling. And this is because readers are told that the two things are the same. It's not that they are similar, it's that they are the same. Okay, so they want us to make that connection stronger in our minds. So readers may rethink how they see the thing being compared. So, for example, if we go back to our similes and metaphors, then if we go back to this, the school was a prison, this metaphor. Now I quite enjoyed school when I was at school. Hopefully you enjoy school too, and you might be homeschooled, or you might go to school, and you might enjoy that. So when we think about this then, and your own positive experiences, when you hear this metaphor, the school was a prison, what comes to mind then? What does it make you think? Well, for me, it makes me rethink that experience. It makes me think, oh, actually, in some ways, it was like a prison. I couldn't just go to the toilet. I had to raise my hand and ask permission. It makes me think, well, actually, I couldn't just eat or drink what I wanted. I had to, adhere to those rules. So it might make you rethink that. And it might do that for positive or negative, depending what the metaphor is. And we can dive even deeper into this then. So when we think about a metaphor, we can actually break it down, and this helps us to understand them in more depth and detail. So metaphors can be broken down into three parts. We've got the tenor, which is the main subject, the main idea. The vehicle, the driving force, if you like, what the tenor is compared to. And the common ground, the similarities between the tenor and the vehicle. So, if we have the metaphor, the classroom is a prison. What is the tenor? What is the vehicle? And what's the common ground? So, in your notebook, just make a note of what is the tenor and what is the vehicle, first of all. What do you think is the tenor and what do you think is the vehicle? In the metaphor, the classroom is a prison. And you might have got this. The tenor is the classroom. It's the main idea. It's the main focus. That is what's going to be described in the subsequent sentences. And then we've got the vehicle, prison. So the classroom is being compared to the prison. So, what is the common ground? What are the similarities between a classroom and a prison? Again, just jot down anything that comes to your mind. What do you think are the similarities between a classroom and a prison? And I've already mentioned some, right? Like you have to ask permission for things. Okay, so make a note of all of the things that you think are similar between a classroom and a prison. Okay, and here's an image to help get you thinking about that. So think about it. I mean, what are the similarities between them, do you think? Okay, so here are some examples of the common ground. We've got confinement, so students are required to be there. They can't leave until there's a set time. Just same as an inmate has to be there in prison all the time. There are rigid rules, so there are schedules, there's bells, permission is needed. The same, have guards in prisons, surveillance, teachers are watching students. You have monitoring of behavior, and in prisons, prisoners are constantly being observed and watched. Uniformity, so in schools, you usually have to wear a uniform, you have similar desks, and everyone has to follow the same rules, right? And again, the same is true in prison. There are rules and they're stripped of their individuality. They have to wear a uniform. Loss of freedom. There's no choice of what you do with your time. You're told these are your lessons, this is your timetable. You can't say, well, actually, I feel like doing this. You have to stick to that timetable. The same in prison. And punishment for breaking the rules. So you might get a detention, you might get sent out of the classroom, your parents might be informed, and the same in prison. There are consequences if you step out of line. You might be detained, on your own. You might have some privileges taken off of you. So maybe no outdoor time or something like that, right? So this is the common ground. So by thinking about the common ground, it allows us to then think about this metaphor in a different light. Okay, so when we then now think of this metaphor, the classroom is a prison, or the classroom was a prison. It starts to take on a whole new meaning, doesn't it? It helps us to imagine what those students are feeling. So the classroom is a prison. We get a sense of it being quite lonely, isolating, and tough. So that's why it's really important that you break down the metaphor into those three parts: the tenor, the vehicle, and the common ground. So let's go back to the beginning then here. So from today's session, we have learned the definition of a simile and a metaphor. We know the differences now between a simile and a metaphor, and we know how to identify a simile and a metaphor by looking at those words is and as, and looking at whether they say for example, the school is a prison, or the school is like a prison, or the school is as restrictive as a prison. That's how it helps us to identify it. And then we need to think about the feeling it creates in us. So remember, a simile, the simile helps us to hold two ideas in our mind and look at the similarities, where a metaphor feels more immersive, doesn't it? So it feels stronger. And as a result of that, we are able to think about, okay, actually, let me rethink this image. Let me rethink this place that I know. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the session. Bye for now.